Mr. Giang was born into an ordinary family in a small, peaceful town located among the green hills. His youth was full of dreams and ambitions. Although his family was not rich, he always nurtured the will to rise up with his own hands. At the age of 26, he worked as a construction worker at a large construction site. During those days, he was a young man full of vitality, full of energy, and hope for the future. But an unexpected accident happened during a construction on the third floor. He accidentally slipped and fell. The shouts, worried eyes, and the sound of the ambulance screeching were always clear in his mind. Although he was saved, he was no longer the same as before. His right leg was seriously injured, and since then, he had to live with a static leg and pain every time the weather turned cold. After the accident, everything seemed to collapse. His relatives, friends, and even the girls who used to chat happily with him gradually left. In a place where labor is the highest value, Mr. Giang became an outsider, considered a burden. No one was willing to stick with a disabled man. But Mr. Giang did not let himself sink into despair. He tried to do every job possible to make a living. He received scrap metal to earn every penny by going around the streets to pick up pieces of plastic bottles and scrap paper that others threw away at night while sitting in a makeshift house. He still told himself that no matter how difficult it was, he would still keep his self-respect and not do anything to shame himself. One day, while wandering under the old bridge to find discarded items, Mr. Jiang heard a weak cry. At first, he thought he heard wrong, but the cry echoed more and more clearly. Following the sound, he discovered a small basket under the bridge, hidden by a few dry branches. In the basket was a newborn baby, purple lips from the cold red swollen eyes from crying too much. He looked around confusedly but saw no one. The weak child moved, his little hands raised, as if asking for help. His heart sank. He thought to himself, "Is this child? Is it the will of heaven? We have nothing, but at least we still have a roof. Maybe we and it both need each other to overcome this life." He decided to bring the child home, even though he didn't know if he could raise it or not. He still put all his faith in himself in that poverty. He named the child Hiu Duong, hoping that its life would shine, like the sun, not covered by darkness. Like his life since he had Hiu Duong, his small house was no longer silent. Like before, the laughter and crying of the child made him feel the happiness he had never had before he started a new journey, the journey of being a father, despite being poor and physically disabled. The following days passed in hardship, but for Mr. Giang, every day had a new meaning. Since adopting Duong, he felt that his life had another purpose: to care for and raise this child to grow up so that he could have money to buy milk, diapers, and clothes for Duong. Mr. Jiang worked tirelessly during the day. He walked all over town to collect scrap. On his shoulder, he always had a heavy sack full of plastic bottles, scrap paper, and aluminum cans. The legs that practiced stillness did not stop him, even though he had to climb up steep slopes or walk through rough roads at night. When he understood Duong was fast asleep on the small bed that he had saved up for a long time to buy, he sat by the oil lamp repairing old things he had picked up to sell for extra money. There were days when he was too tired. He fell asleep right on the table, his head on a pile of unfinished bottles. Even though it was difficult, he never let Duong lack anything. He saved every penny, not daring to buy new things for himself, but was willing to spend money to buy the best powdered milk for his child. When he understood Duong was sick, he carried his child to the clinic and waited all day just to receive a few doses of free medicine, watching his son grow up day by day. Mr. Jiang could not help but feel proud that the child who used to be weak and pale was now plump and healthy. The black eyes of Hio Duong, looking at him every time the little boy babbled, "Dad," made him feel that all the hardships were worth it. However, it was his excessive love and pampering that unintentionally formed in Duong a habit of relying on him. He never let him do anything, always thinking that he was still young. Let me do it. Just need him to study well, grow up and have a good life. That's enough. Time passed. Duong grew up under the protection of his father. He didn't need to do housework, didn't have to worry about anything. Every day, Mr. Jiang woke up early to prepare meals, took his son to school in an old wheelchair. He just needed to study and play like any other child. Once, a kind old neighbor suggested to Mr. Jiang, "Mr. Jiang, I think you spoil the little boy too much. You have to let him do it himself. Teach him how to be independent, so that when he grows up, he will know how to stand on his own." But he just laughed. "He's still young. Why can I let him do it? When he grows up, he will naturally understand things." But Duong didn't grow up. As Mr. Jiang expected, the pampering made him lazy and had no opinions at school. He studied haphazardly just for show. At home, he never helped his father with anything. Even when asked to help his father, he frowned. "You're too busy, Dad. Do it yourself." Every time that happened, Mr. Jiang just quietly did it for him. He didn't want to make his son sad, and he didn't want him to think that his father was a burden. However, he still had a lingering worry in his heart. He knew that he was no longer young, and his health was getting weaker. Would he be strong enough to face life when he was no longer around? Would he be able to take care of himself, or would he falter in the face of difficulties? He put aside that worry and continued to work tirelessly with him. As long as he understood that Duong was happy, he was willing to do everything. He hoped that no matter how difficult his life was, Duong's life would always be full of light. As the years passed, Duong became a 21-year-old man, tall, healthy, and full of life. This was something that Mr. Jiang always felt proud of. Seeing his son grow up and no longer be the weak boy he once was the greatest comfort in his life. That joy was even greater when he understood that Duong decided to marry the daughter-in-law he brought home, a beautiful, agile girl from the same town who at first glance looked very filial. On the wedding day, Mr. Jiang, although not in good health, still personally repaired the old wheelchair to attend. He wore old clothes, but they were neatly ironed. His face shone with immense joy. In the early days after marriage, life in the small family was quite peaceful. The daughter-in-law took care of Mr. Jiang very thoughtfully. Every day she cooked 3 meals and brought them to his bed. Even though his health was weak and he had difficulty walking, she never complained a word. Looking at his daughter-in-law, Mr. Jiang thought to himself, "I understand that Duong is very lucky to have such a gentle wife," but that happiness did not last long. After a few months, the daughter-in-law began to change her attitude. She made an excuse that her biological parents' house was poor and wanted to bring them back to live together. At first, she understood that Duong was 0. He made an excuse that if the house was small, it would easily lead to conflicts in the central region. But through his wife's sweet words and tears every night, he gradually fell in love. One day, his parents-in-law moved into the house right from the moment he entered. They considered this house as their own, occupying the largest room to live in, leaving Mr. Jiang in the small, dark room. He didn't say anything, just silently endured. But the situation got worse and worse as his daughter-in-law and her parents increasingly looked down on him. The climax occurred when the daughter-in-law decided to use the old warehouse as a place to live. For Mr. Jiang, it would be quieter if he stayed here. She spoke sweetly, but her eyes were cold, as if she wanted to chase him out of the house. Since being moved into the warehouse, Mr. Giang's life has become more miserable. The small, damp warehouse smelled of mold every time it rained. The old bed creaked every time he lay down. However, he still didn't blame them. In his heart, he just thought that as long as they lived well, it wouldn't be a big deal if he suffered a little. But things didn't stop there. His daughter-in-law began to blame Mr. Jiang every time he coughed or coughed up phlegm because of illness. She complained that he disturbed the whole family's sleep. The neighbors who knew the story couldn't help but feel indignant. Many people began to gossip about Hu Duong's unfilial behavior. The villagers gave him the nickname Unfilial Son, a name that made him uncomfortable, but he didn't dare to protest to his wife. One night, when everyone thought everyone was fast asleep, Mr. Giang accidentally heard the conversation between Hu Duong and his wife. His daughter-in-law's voice softly echoed in the night. He said, "Hey, your father is here all the time. How can we be at peace? I think it's best to put him in a nursing home. After a while, everyone will forget." Hu Duong, although he hesitated for a moment, finally replied, "Yes, but if outsiders knew, they would say he was unfilial, and there was no other way." Those words were like a knife stabbing into Mr. Jiang's heart. He sat silently in the dark, trying to hold back his sobs. It turned out that he was such a burden. He told himself that the next morning, when the sky opened, Mr. Giang packed a few meager items into a small bag. He left a note with a few short lines, understanding that Duong BA is leaving BA's property. "This house is now yours. Live well. Don't blame BA." He stepped out of the house that he had spent his whole life building. His slow, meditative footsteps gradually disappeared in the dim dawn light. Mr. Giang had nowhere to go, so he decided to start a new life in a city where no one knew who he was. Even though his heart was filled with pain, he still tried to tell himself that it meant his son could live happily. He was willing to endure everything. Leaving the house he had been attached to for 15 years, Mr. Jiang did not know where to go. His small, hunched figure and his quiet practice steps gradually disappeared behind the dusty dirt road in the early morning. In his hand, he only had a small bag containing a few old clothes and some savings. His heart was heavy, but he still told himself he would live a miserable life. A little more misery is okay, as long as they are safe. Mr. Giang took the cheapest bus to a nearby big city, a place he had never been to. When he got off the bus, he was overwhelmed by the hustle and bustle of car horns and people talking loudly. But in the midst of that hustle and bustle, he felt lonelier than ever. With the little money in his pocket, he did not dare to rent a room, so he looked for areas for the homeless where he could stay overnight. Under the porches or parks, his thin, frail body quickly blended into the crowd of homeless people. His new life began from there, a life in which he only hoped to be able to survive on his own, without bothering anyone. In the early days, Mr. Jiang made a living by collecting scrap metal, a job he was familiar with since he was in town, with an old cloth bag on his shoulder. He wandered the streets, searching through trash bins to find plastic bottles, aluminum cans, or anything that could be sold the harsh weather of the city. Sometimes the sun was blazing, sometimes it rained like a little water, making his frail body increasingly worn out one morning. While searching for scrap metal in a deserted alley, Mr. Jiang accidentally got cut by a sharp piece of glass. His hand bled continuously, dyeing the cloth bag he was carrying red. The sharp pain made him stagger and sit down on the sidewalk. Looking at the bleeding wound, he sighed. It was just a small wound. I still have to try to live." He tore a piece of old shirt and wrapped it around his arm to stop the bleeding and continued working as if nothing had happened. But the wound had serious consequences. After a few days, his arm began to swell, redden, and ache intensely. He tried to endure it and did not dare to go to the hospital because he was afraid of spending money. His already weak body was now even more exhausted. Every night, he lay curled up under the porch, shivering from a fever, one afternoon. While he was bending down to search for scrap metal on the side of the road, a shiny black car stopped nearby. A young man got out of the car. The young man's eyes flashed with surprise when he recognized the old man was struggling to bend down to pick up a plastic bottle from the ground. Uncle Jiang. Mr. Jiang raised his head. His eyes were wide open, looking at the young man in front of him. Tall appearance, familiar face. But he couldn't remember who you are. Uncle Thang. Do you remember 5 years ago? You were the one who saved me when I was orphaned, both father and mother. Memories gradually flooded into Mr. Jiang's head. Thang was the boy he had taken care of when his parents died in an accident. At that time, he fed Thang. Let him stay in his small house for 2 years before relatives came to pick him up. The boy knelt down and held his hand. Mr. Jiang's skinny hand. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Uncle, why are you suffering like this? Still understand Duong. Why doesn't he worry for you? Uncle Jiang just shook his head. Choked voice. Duong is fine. He has a family. BA doesn't want to bother. He could not hide his anger. Immediately put Mr. Jiang in the car and drove straight to the hospital to treat the wound during the journey. He kept asking Han and expressing his gratitude to his old foster father. After being treated, Mr. Jiang was promoted to live with him in his spacious villa every day. Thang took care of him like a real father, worrying about every meal and sleep. Seeing Thang successful and rich, Mr. Jiang was both happy and ashamed of his situation. But in his heart, he still felt troubled about Duong. He could not stop thinking about the son he had raised and could not forget the memories between the two father and son. One day he confided to Thang that he missed Duong so much, not knowing what he was like now. Thang nodded slightly, understanding that Mr. Jiang still devoted all his love to the son whom he had sacrificed his whole life to raise. After living with Thang, he was taken care of both physically and mentally. Mr. Jiang expressed his desire to return to the old town where he had been attached for half his life. His heart was still troubled about the son he had raised. Although he was deeply hurt, he hoped to be able to look back at the old place even just once, to close the sad memories. He agreed, but he did not intend to let this trip be. It was simply a visit. He wanted everyone in town to know the truth about what Mr. Jiang had experienced, as well as to clarify what Heo Duong and his wife had done that day. A convoy of 10 luxury cars followed each other into the small town. The sound of the engines on the quiet dirt road made the curious people pour out, going out to see the surprised eyes and gossip when the convoy stopped in front of Heo Duong's house, the house that had been Mr. Jiang's whole life. Heo Duong's wife was sitting in the house and hurriedly ran out. When she saw the luxury convoy, she could not believe her eyes at the sight of SAOHOA outside the gate. She turned back and called her husband in a hurried voice. "Mr. Duong, go out and see if something big happened." Heo Duong walked out with a puzzled expression, but when he saw the convoy, his eyes lit up with ambition. In his heart, he thought that perhaps this was an opportunity that would help him change his life that was going downhill leisurely. Get out of the first luxury car calm and serious. Then he turned back to help Mr. Jiang get out of the car when he saw his father understand. Duong was stunned, and his wife immediately changed her attitude. She smiled brightly and ran to call Mr. Giang. "Dad, why didn't Dad say before that Dad and brothers and sisters come in and sit down?" Understand Duong, although confused, also took a few steps. Shyly greeted Mr. Jiang, but Thong didn't give them a chance to continue that fake scene. He pointed his finger at the couple's face. "Understand?" Duong's voice was sharp. The two of them really don't know. Shame the father who raised him for more than 20 years. How did he treat him? Kick him out of the house to live on the street as a tormentor? Is he still human? The surrounding villagers heard those words, immediately gossiped. Some people loudly criticized what an unfilial son, who before everyone said he was lucky because he was taken care of by Mr. Giang. Now, look at his face. Understand. Duong paled. He knelt down in front of his father. Choked, "Dad, I was wrong. I was not knowing how to appreciate Dad's efforts. Please forgive Dad. Let your wife also join in. Following Dad, I only want the best. For the whole family. If anything goes wrong, Dad, forgive." Let the cold-blooded Thang interrupt. "Enough. Forgiveness cannot cover up what the two of you have done. Build this house. Everything you two have is thanks to the efforts and sacrifices of Bak Jiang. But you two do not deserve to stay here for another day." Thang continued to declare that this house and land still belong to Bak Jiang. "I will do the procedures to reclaim them. You two immediately arranged to leave here." The villagers clapped their hands in agreement. The discussion grew louder. The wife understood. Duong panicked and tried to beg Dad not to chase us away. "I promise to change. I really know my mistakes. I understand." Duong knelt down and held Dad's hand tightly. "Please, Dad, give me a chance to start over. I regret it so much. Please, Dad, don't abandon me before the please." Mr. Giang shed tears. Although his heart was full of hurt, he still could not bear to see his son fall into a dead end. He turned to Thang and said in a trembling voice, "Thang, please, be gentle with him, no matter what. He is still your son. I don't want him to suffer like you did." Thang reluctantly nodded, but still sternly. "I will listen. Follow me. But only this time. If you let down Uncle Giang again, you will no longer have a chance any more meetings to help Mr. Jiang into the car before leaving." They refused to continue to accept such a person, citing that Hio Duong's personality did not fit the company's culture, and there was no place to rely on. Hio Duong Lam and the scene of 7 Karma, with no money and no relatives beside him. He had to wander the streets picking up scrap metal to make a living, just like his father had done in the past. Those wandering days were the most painful time in Hio Duong's life. Every time he bent down to pick up a plastic bottle from the trash can, he remembered the image of his father, who silently sacrificed everything so that he could live a full life. What did I do to my father? Why did I become this person? That thought haunted him every day. One day, when Mr. Giang returned to his hometown to visit the town, he happened to see a skinny man stooping to pick up trash on the side of the road. His steps stopped when he realized it was Hio Duong. He looked emaciated. His hands were skinny and calloused. Mr. Giang's left eye was filled with tears. His heart ached when he saw his son. In this situation, he walked up and called Duong softly, "Son, right? Don't you understand?" Duong startled. He looked up and saw his father. He was stunned. His eyes were red. He knelt down and bowed before him. Tears poured like rain. "Dad, I'm sorry I made too many mistakes. I don't have the face to look at you, Dad, anymore." Mr. Giang helped his son up. His voice choked up. "Dad, don't blame me if I make mistakes. Correct. If you live, you still have a chance to start over after returning to the city." Mr. Giang told Thang about Hio Duong's situation. Even though he was still angry, he agreed to give Hu Duong a chance. He accepted Duong to work in his company, but with a strict condition that he must work hard to prove that he is worthy and not let Bachjiang down again. Duong not only agreed, but also determined to change from a lazy and dependent person. He gradually became diligent, studious, and dedicated. In the early days, he was only assigned small tasks, but over time, he proved his change with his constant efforts. He often spent money to buy small gifts to send home, for Mr. Giang to visit and take care of his father whenever he had free time. The relationship between father and son gradually healed. The villagers, from looking down on him, began to acknowledge his change. They secretly thought that although he had made mistakes, standing up and starting over was also worthy of respect. Many years later, understanding Duong was not only a good worker, but also a devoted son to his father. Mr. Giang finally had happy days without having to worry. For his son, understanding Duong once again said to Mr. B.A., "I made a lot of mistakes, but I will never let you down again. I will use this life to make up for my mistakes." Mr. Giang smiled gently, his eyes shining with satisfaction. He did not need anything more besides seeing his son grow up to live responsibly. The story of Mr. Giang and Hio Duong brings profound lessons that touch the heart of anyone. Father-son love is unconditional, but gratitude and filial piety are the duty of Mr. Giang, who sacrificed his whole life for his son. But Hio Duong's ingratitude almost caused both of them to lose the most sacred relationship. Ingratitude is the root of loss, but sincere repentance can save everything. Although Hio Duong made a serious mistake, his determination to correct his mistake helped him find himself and rebuild his life, bringing comfort to his father. Compassion and forgiveness are the greatest strength. Even though he was angry with Hio Duong's unfilial actions, he still gave him a chance. That is proof that a tolerant heart can change the fate of others. This story is not only a lesson for those who are children, but also a reminder of the value of humanity, gratitude, and redemption. If you find this story meaningful, please click subscribe to our channel so we can continue to spread humane stories and valuable life lessons. Each of your shares is not only a support, but also a way to help stories like this touch the hearts of more people. Let's build a loving, understanding, and sharing community of good values. We thank you for your support and hope that this story will be a source of inspiration for everyone to live better and cherish family and loved ones. Please subscribe now and share this story with those you love.